We now continue Chapter 10 with podcast number 3, which starts to discuss a discussion about lesson planning. Instruction is a process involving preactive, active, and post-active decision making. Preactive decisions are those involved in planning curriculum, units, and lessons. Active decisions are those made during the conduct of the lesson or the teaching of the lesson. And post-active decisions are those made as a result of reflecting on and evaluating the processes and products of instruction. Planning is a critical part of the teaching process, whether you're in math or history or language arts or physical education. It doesn't matter. It is critical to the teaching process. The products of planning explicitly describe the teacher's intent for student outcomes and the teacher's strategy for how to bring students to those outcomes. As mentioned before, there are different levels of planning, from the national standards, national NASB K through 12 standards, to the state curriculum, South Carolina physical education standards, district curriculum, and school curriculum, down to the lesson curriculum and the teacher curriculum. Planning is an integral part of the continuous process that's called the reflective cycle, one in which you plan, then you take that plan and you teach it, then after you teach it, you evaluate it or assess the students, and you reflect on your own teaching. And then that cycle starts all over again with planning. This slide is about learning outcomes at different levels of planning, and I want to point out here that many people use outcomes, objectives, goals, aims, and so on. Those are all basically interchangeable terms, but most people call more broad objectives. They call those outcomes and or goals. Objectives infer that there's a little more specificity to it, and so we call them lesson objectives no matter what. These are examples here of the same type of objective but applied in different places. So the national standards level says that you want to demonstrate competency and motor skills. The state level is talking about demonstrate basic skills used in individual and dual activities. At the school district level, they're talking about demonstrate competency in badminton. At the unit level, they're talking about demonstrating good form in the short serve. And at the lesson level, they're saying serve a shuttle into an opponent's court 90% of the time in a game situation. Much more specific. National standards much more broad. You might think to yourself, why should we write lesson plans in physical education? I hear that all the time. There's a myth about current teachers in physical education that they don't ever plan and there's no accountability by principals. That's simply not true in most cases. In most schools these days, principals require lesson plans of all of their teachers because of the Common Core standards that we have in the states now. And if you're going to make math and reading and writing language arts teachers do lesson plans all the time, it's not fair for them to do it, and the physical education and music and art teachers don't have to do it. So there's more accountability expected in physical education programs today simply because of sometimes No Child Left Behind, which is now morphed into the Common Core standards. Planning establishes goals for student learning and what they should know and be able to do before they leave your lesson, leave your unit, leave your grade level, and so on. More extensive planning actually equals a positive effect on the quality of programs. Less accountability in planning leads to ineffective teaching and ineffective programs and a lack of student learning. In her textbook, Dr. Rink says that beginning teachers will not really begin to think as educators until they can establish goals for what they want to do, select what they do in light of those goals, and evaluate what they do based on those goals. In other words, you have got to plan. A lesson represents more than just what we're doing for that day. It's actually kind of like a work of art. It has a beginning, a set induction or introduction. It has a middle, which makes up the learning experiences or learning tasks that you're teaching to the students. And it has ends. In other words, it has a closure, a review, and assessment. And all of those things give structure and meaning to the good learning experiences. Good teachers reflect on their lessons and they learn from their teaching. A lesson plan is actually a guide with objectives. What you're trying to do is translate broader goals or standards into more specific learning experiences. Good lesson plans are very difficult to write because of the specific descriptions of the intentions of what you want to do. What you need to think about is, what does an objective look like as a learning experience or learning task, and then what does it look like as an assessment? You need to develop a good lesson. As you'll see later on in Chapter 8, you need to use a variety of teaching strategies to help reach different learning abilities of different students. You need to change the practice conditions to elicit motor behavior or success, just as we talked about in Chapter 5. Changing the equipment, doing different drills, having individual work partners, groups, all of those things are important as management components. You also need to use common sense about the demands of the lesson. It's better to practice two skills in one period and combine them into a game-like practice than to practice one skill over and over again in one particular period where the students might get bored and get frustrated and tired of doing the same skill. Lesson objectives are written as educational objectives or behavioral objectives. It should be written in terms of what students are expected to learn, not what students are supposed to do in the lesson. We want to know what they're learning by what they're doing. They can be broad, as in a unit, or they can be very specific, as in a lesson. But they always should be written for the psychomotor, cognitive, and affective learning domains. In fact, we require you on our Winthrop lesson plan to include at least one objective for your lessons in each of the three learning domains. And usually you'll probably have more than one in the motor domain. That's the end of podcast 3 for Chapter 10.